All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for coming to this Hashi Talk. The topic is how HashiCorp SREs built HCP's incident management program, and it's for Hashi Talks 2022. So you're in the right place. My name is Martin Smith. I'm just going to switch screens here. I'm a site reliability engineer at HashiCorp. Pronouns are he, him. You can see my social media handle there. You can find me on Twitter. I'll also be presenting with another colleague, Michael Main, who's going to introduce himself a little bit later in this talk, and we should both be in the chat, and you can engage with us there or on social media, Twitter later. Feel free to reach out. But yeah, that's us. Just moving forward here, going to switch back to the slides. I do want to say, when we talk about building HCP or the HashiCorp cloud platform and the incident management process, that we are standing on the shoulders of the Terraform cloud product too. We're not the first cloud offering at HashiCorp. That's Terraform cloud. But when we were building the incident management process for HCP, they didn't have a ton of incidents at that point. And so really we were looking to align ourselves with what severities they had for their incidents, and we were growing just like they were. And so we wanted to be complementary to them, not necessarily to combine processes with them. Things were going really smoothly with their incidents. Again, they just didn't have a lot, and we were really ambitious and trying to build a lot at once. And so we were kind of just building our own, and then we were going to, at a later date, kind of see how we ended up. Yeah, we really took a lot of stuff that they had learned and started with that advice. But as you'll learn in this presentation, one of the lessons learned we have is actually different teams need different processes. And so, yeah, we were kind of starting, again, aligned with them, but not necessarily exactly with what they had. Another lesson that you should take away from this that we used heavily, and it's built and sort of baked into the HashiCorp culture, is our document writing process. So HashiCorp has this idea of product requirement documents, or PRDs, and RFCs, or requests for comment. So at HashiCorp, we write a lot. We write documents for what we think a problem is, and we write documents for how we're going to solve that problem. And we kind of knew for the incident management process what the problem was, right? The problem is we knew we were going to have interruptions in service, and we knew we were going to have incidents. And the RFC process is really where we focused for how are we going to write an incident management process, and how are we going to solve the fact that we're going to have incidents? What are we going to do about them? But we really lean on this process, and everywhere else I've worked, like, I've yearned for this kind of process, and it's such an effective process at HashiCorp. So like, I'll tell you, and I've actually got like a example. So this is a template, and this is actually public. You can go look this up. Feel free to grab it and use it, adopt it, check it out. There's a lot more of this. That's actually how HashiCorp works, is a whole public site. But yeah, we wrote a proposal and we circulated it. And this is really cool at HashiCorp. You actually see everything from HR process changes all the way down to major engineering changes for products, all kind of go through this. And incident management was no exception. And I think this is one reason it was so successful, is that we proposed our incident management process using this process. So I'll actually now just stepping back a little bit, kind of show you the timeline of when we built the incident management process, or at least the first pass of it. So I'll show you, I started at HashiCorp in December of 2019. The first HCP product, and I use air quotes there, you could probably call HCS HashiCorp Consul Service on Azure. Notice that's not HCP, like there's HCP Consul or later in this timeline, but the first one that the teams built was HCS, which is really relies on all the same underlying infrastructure. Even though it's called HCS, it uses all the same microservices. And so you could see we had no on-call, we had no incident management, we had no PagerDuty set up, we had really nothing. We had no postmortem retrospective kind of process. And so between December and April, we did all of this, and got teams on call and got retros running and all of that. But we said as soon as we have customers using a product, we need to have all of this in place. So in this short span of basically a few months, we said, all right, what's our deadline to get people on call? What's our deadline to use this new incident management process, et cetera, et cetera. So here's actually a screenshot. You can see the date on there, the created date of the doc, and you can see the summary. And really, you can even see the goal, the high level summary of our incident management process here too, which is learning. Our goal is institutional learning. And so that's the main goal. And it's important to think about like what is the goal of your incident management process, right? So like that is a really important conversation to have. And I think we got really lucky that at HashiCorp and the teams that we were working with all really had that institutional learning goal. But have that conversation with your teams. I think that was a big lesson learned for us is that not everyone has the same goal for the incident management process. And I think you'll see it reflected in a lot of the other things I'm going to tell you that our goal was institutional learning and just getting better at running incidents and shortening incidents and making things better for our customers. So talk about that goal before you get started, because that'll feed into every other decision that you make. So let's see here. So I just want to talk about, we also wrote some other RFCs, one for how we're going to do retrospectives and postmortems. That might be part of your incident management process, but it's really outside of running incidents. It's what happens after. And we also wrote a separate one for on call. And here's some of the topics that we included. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I am going to tell you. So like our incident process ended up, it's funny, not being too different. If you go look up like PagerDuty's public incident process, which is I think they've pared down their docs from what is their internal docs, but not too dissimilar from that. And I could talk to you about some of the differences, but I'll talk to you about the incident management one in particular. Is we ended up with basically 4 severity levels. The first two, Sev 1 and Sev 2, would wake someone up. A Sev 1 is like basically things aren't working for customers. Sev 2 is like things are working but are severely impaired. And then after that, it's things that would be business hours that wouldn't wake us up. A Sev 3 would be like something that's cosmetic but is apparent to customers. And then a Sev 4 would be something that's maybe not apparent, but we're worried is going to cause a problem later or could like is imminently an issue. It might also be something where we're tracking work that is like not customer visible, but we want to use the incident process to track an urgent maintenance. We also have like lesser categories, like for example, a bug that's never worked. So we don't track that through the incident management process. So we say like, if this never worked, it's not an incident because it never broke. It was just always, it was shipped broken, for example, not an incident. But yeah, our incident management process also covers like what happens before an incident. How do you kick one off? How you go from being a first responder to pulling a team together, what the investigation loop looks like. And then afterwards, how you shut an incident down, how you communicate about it, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's these other categories here of other RFCs. Again, I don't want to read all of this to you because we only have a limited amount of time here, but make sure that if you cover some of these other areas that you cover things like facilitation, documentation for retros, how you make sure action items get done, etc. Also, some other lessons learned. I want to just talk to you about some of the lessons we learned also writing this process and having this document, this RFC for how we write an incident management process. One big one we learned was that we all came to this with lessons learned from other teams, right? That we've got like and other jobs and things. And we learned that basically none of that applied really well to our current experience. So we'd seen patterns before, like teams want to, like, for example, EU responders, people that were awake already, we wanted them to respond to incidents. But if we had few people in the EU and we had an incident in the EU, that wasn't fair. That meant it took up more of their day than people in the US. And so, like, even if you had that pattern at a previous company where you had more people awake during EU business hours, that might have been great. But that wasn't going to work here. Another another example of that might have been that you had at a previous company that a similar thing with having a two-layer rotation, where you had enough people where that worked, but on a small team, that doesn't work at HashiCorp, for example, if you had a brand new team. Um, the magic of the RFC process is it raised these questions really early and consulted with engineers. We didn't just like put everybody on call. And so uh, that RFC process was just critical in surfacing the fact that we had all these ideas and previous experience, but it was just super hard to apply them in a new team with new dynamics, with different experience levels, different countries, even different like jurisdictions legally for who we could put on call and for how long. So that RFC process was worth its weight in gold. Another thing was that culture comes from within. Like everybody at this company really wanted to have a humane on-call culture, which leads to incidents, right? Incidents um, can be really stressful for folks, and we wanted things like actionable pages that are actual issues. We don't want pages that are noise. We want, if you have a rough week, we want your team to help override your on-call. We want um, if you're awake and working and you cause an incident, we'd like you to take responsibility for it and not just kick it over the fence. We want you to essentially build empathy on your team, but it's like super hard to just tell a team like be empathetic, right? So it turns out like some of that was originally in our RFCs around incidents, and we took them out, and we made recommendations, but it's super hard. We learned it's really difficult to just say like be empathetic. Maybe that's obvious in hindsight, but yeah, building that culture, you almost have to embed on those teams to sort of build that culture of empathy. Don't think you can get away with just saying you care about this. You've got to take concrete action on that team and be very deliberate about it to make that team effective at like reducing the pain and making it a really humane on-call experience. Um, Another example of that is like actually I'll go back and say one more thing about this, which is that don't even put folks on call if you think that that rotation is painful. Like don't let that creep on, and that actually ties into the next one. Why am I talking about on call so much when when this is an incident management talk? Well, um incident management process is all about creating room to respond, so it's intimately connected to on call. And it makes it really hard to respond to incidents if on call gets really busy. And this is another thing we really saw a lot of, which is that there's a lot of regular work that people pattern matched to on call. And so even though we were working on incident management, we had to basically really help teams resist the urge to get other work put into the on-call rotation as work. So watch out for that. You might even want to bake that into your incident management process, whether that's support, keeping the lights on type work for the team. I mentioned like weekly data processing. There's all kinds of like SLO review, lots of things teams do regularly. Um, Also, blame, and I kind of put like really generic stuff in here. Blame is baggage, right? There's a lot of people that come from other companies and teams that we hired as we were building out this team. They just had terrible experiences on call. Why does blame matter? I remember having this exchange with somebody in an RFC where they said, I said, yeah, it's blameless. And they said, well, you have to say that in every retro. And I said, well, why every retro? Like, people should know it's blameless. And they said, you've got to reiterate it, like the culture will creep. And I was like, oh, okay. And they had just had such a bad experience that they really wanted in every retrospective or every incident related meeting to repeat it. And I thought, wow, it's like it's seared into this person's mind how that bad experience. And so you've got to really stay on top of this, and maybe not even put folks on call if you feel like the on-call rotation is going badly, or really continue to emphasize the blameless nature and stay on top of what people are bringing to the rotation as you hire more folks. So like continually watch out for blame. Blame creeps back in over and over, and you've got to stay on top of it. Um, I'll also say that when you're one last thing as far as like lessons learned is that incidents um when you're doing incidents and you're building an incident management process, let's always be retroing. And this was a big lesson learned for us is that they can these retros, like it's not just for incident management. We retroed the incident management process. um we're trying to build this culture that learns, so like anytime there's something wrong, whether it's on call, you could retro the retro process. Whenever we failed for anything, retro it all the time. This may get silly, like it feels so much inception, but just always retro. Highly recommend using that anytime something goes wrong. A project. I mean, this you'd be surprised how much we've actually leveraged this even totally outside of the incident management process. This culture of just like having a retro. This is something really positive, I think, that's come out of our incident management process building, that's pervaded way beyond incident management and has made us a better like engineering organization. So I'll say like those are some lessons learned. I've talked about what we've built, how we've really doubled down on the RFC process. I'll say we got to this point where we defined a process. We had teams that were on call. They were running through incidents. It was pretty much a heavyweight process. But then we added tooling and it broke everything. So here's some examples of what we had to do, right? So we were making Slack channels. That was another part of the process. We had a scribe that was trying to write in a Google Doc what happened. You had to send emails. You had to schedule things. There was just all these steps in our incident management process too. And so we were like, oh, we need tooling. We didn't really know. We'd never used incident management tooling before. So we're like, we're going to find some tooling to make some of these steps easier so we can spend more time responding to incidents and less time with this giant process we've written up. And by the way, like with an RFC doc, one thing we did for this process doc, this process we were building was like the process got big, right? Like we built a process through consensus. So there were a lot of steps, I'll admit. You can see some of the other ones here I haven't spoken about. So we have the spreadsheet, like, can we do it with the current process? I've trimmed the tool names off here so you can't see them, but it was really interesting once we picked a tool. It presented some new problems. People just started to like click through the tools once we picked one. And it turned out once they had a tool, they just did the steps that made it easy for them. And so it turned out that like some of our process was helpful for some people and not others. So that's why I kind of say at the beginning here, it broke everything. So we realized that not, for example, where is it? It's like send an email as a step in here. And it's like, oh, not actually every team wanted to send an email for everything, or not every team wanted to page all of the same people, or not every team posted in Slack. And so it was like, once we had a tool that could do all these steps, we realized that we had built this giant process and not every step was helpful to every person. Yeah, so then we kind of went back and said, all right, what is the team missing? And it made us reevaluate our whole process once we had a tool to automate this stuff. And we realized we could actually take multiple paths through the incident management process, which is super confusing too, because you have some teams that are responding for multiple incidents. For example, my role as an SRE, how much of your organization should have the same incident management process? I said at the beginning of this talk that we have our Terraform cloud organization that also has incidents. Should they use the same process, or should the tool support more than one process? So once we added tooling, it made us completely reevaluate how we had done incident management. Yeah, so I'll kind of stop there. That was our early journey, and I'll pass it off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. My name is Michael Main. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm also an SRE at HashiCorp. I started at the end of August last year, so I'm a fairly new addition, and I've been working with our team to make changes to the incident management process since I joined. Um, so when I started, the incident management process was already mature and battle tested. We knew it worked, but we were wondering what more could we be getting out of it. So when I started on this project, our goals were to use our incident management tooling to surface more data and make that data more digestible to a broader audience. Um, so change is hard. One of the difficult things about making changes to process is just fighting the inertia of what already exists, particularly when rolling out changes for how the organization handles incidents, which can be stressful in high pressure situations. The tendency to fall back on what's familiar can be especially strong. When we considered how we could extract more information from our incidents, limiting the overhead of the changes was one of our top priorities. So we started by figuring out what we had for free without making changes to the process. And it turns out that quantifiable facts about the incident, the date, the duration, severity chosen when we kicked it off, things that the tooling was already asking for, those were easy. They're already being tracked by the tooling, and we can kind of just go get it. But that doesn't leave a complete picture of what the incident management or incident was. Which teams were involved, what services went down, what caused it, and were our customers impacted. These types of things are things that the incident management tooling can't know unless we tell it. So we try to figure out how to tell it. Um, and in order to get that qualitative data, our first step was to introduce tags. So these were user-defined tags for our incidents, covering everything from team to component to customer impact. And we introduced these incident workflows for our incident commanders to fill them out while the incident was ongoing. And it went okay. The problem is that people who are running incident response are, responding to the incident. And so there isn't always time to fill out every tag, and sometimes the right answer isn't even always clear. A lot of times we're asking teams, tell us where the fire is, when so far all they found is smoke. So we try to take a look at what our timing should be to improve this. And our first step was just to push data gathering further back into the process. We still use tags today, but we also introduced these custom questions into our retrospectives. So they live in our retrospectives in our incident management tooling for facilitators in the team to fill out after the incident has concluded. The questions cover topics such as detection, impact, causal factors, and breached SLOs. We have limited data so far. It's pretty early days for this, but our initial impression is that this is a positive format. People are engaged with it, and we are getting answers. So we improved how we harvested data from incidents, but what about after the incident? How are we presenting our findings, and how many audiences are we actually presenting to? We started out thinking that retrospectives are for incident response teams to iteratively improve their own process. And we still think that. Ultimately they are. But there's more than one audience for our retrospectives, we found. And the other audience is stakeholders. People who come in after the retrospective has concluded to see what they can learn from what the incident was, or even to just get a picture of what happened. And so this is an actual old summary, although I've blocked out everything of what happened. In the incident summary, it used to do a lot of heavy lifting. We included a lot of information as guidelines for what should be included in a summary, and depending on who wrote it and what the nature of the incident was, we received a lot of varied responses. We didn't really have an issue with engagement. As Martin mentioned, people here are pretty used to writing. We have a strong writing culture, and incident summaries were no exception to that. But a lot of data could be lost for stakeholders to quickly understand what happened in an incident. And so we took a look at the format for our retrospectives. And this is the guidelines for the new format. And it's pretty wordy, but basically it breaks down to, we introduced more specific sections. We have summary still exists, but the guideline is 3 to 5 sentences max. And now we have these other sections: impact and trigger, detection and resolution. These are things that should be one sentence of, what was our quantifiable impact from this? Or why did this happen right now as opposed to a week ago? And that makes it easier for people to come in after the fact and take a look at these retrospectives and say, oh, okay, all I was really wondering is, how do we detect this? Was it an SLO that fired, or, did one of our engineers find it? How do we do it? And that it can be easily grabbed from this new format. But while we have this new audience, we still want to preserve what we liked about the old format, which was that it was pretty good at getting action items out of the incident for teams to improve on. So the other important part of this is that we have guidelines for retrospective facilitators to fill out as many of these before the retrospective happens as possible. We want the discussion of the retrospective to still be focused on what do we learn from this last incident, and what action items can we capture so that we can not have this incident again, and how can we further improve our services and our response to our services going down. So that's the guidelines of how that changed, and we're pretty happy with that change so far. Another audience that we have is for our weekly ops review meeting. This is a mixed audience. We have leadership and stakeholders, but we also have engineers who were involved in the incident response. And we conduct this weekly to go over what happened in the past week, what we need to know about that, what we can learn from it, and if anything needs to be done. So the underlying data for this needs to serve all audiences. We have to have a quick and digestible summary of incidents so that everybody on the call can kind of jump right in. But we also need it to be technically detailed enough to get into specifics if need be. And so what we had been doing was supporting this process by manually compiling data into this spreadsheet, which I've included a screenshot of, at a high investment of time until recently. But through a combination of tags and custom questions and the other quantifiable data from the incident management tooling API, we started to programmatically build this spreadsheet. And in so doing, we are able to find more rich data than we previously had. And we hope to improve the process as we go and improve how this conversation goes. And, starting it out as a programmatic process actually opens the door for us to start having different, more involved conversations in ops review, going below the surface and figuring out what can we learn from the past week. So looking back on this presentation so far, Martin talked about building the incident process from the ground up and introducing tooling to that process. And it eventually solved our logistics problem, getting people looking at the same timelines and incidents and in the same meeting rooms, and actually opened us up to focus on not just responding to incidents, but learning from them and adapting to our learnings. So now we have to look at what are the next steps for us. We want the process to be scalable and data rich. We know that. But what are some concerns and goals and challenges that we face with the next step of this, the next evolution? So Martin showed this earlier, but I wanted to bring it back up to emphasize how different our concerns are now. Our problem was essentially like, how can we stop making so many Google Docs? And now it's like, how much of this can be analyzed and learned from, and how deep can we dig into our data? And then eventually can we start automating things away? And none of that is really reflected in our tooling search to begin with. This is literally like, can we hop into a Zoom together? And no shade on that. We just didn't even know the questions that we could be asking. We were just trying to establish what our incident management process should be. But now that we know that, and we've adopted tooling successfully, and we can see what other questions we can ask now that we're out of the operational burden of just responding to incidents, it's prudent for us to consider what other tools are out there. And there's some interesting features that other tools have. One feature is automated remediation tooling. Can we actually turn runbooks into programs that solve incidents for us? That's something that would be really exciting and not offered by our current tooling. So it's something that we would consider in the future. Another thing is flexibility. What if we want to roll this process out even more broadly? What if we want to target non-engineering teams? How can the tool adapt to the different needs of these teams in a way that is effective and doesn't disrupt their current workflows? And then another feature is just capitalizing on our current investment with some of our other integrations. So there's major tools for monitoring and managing pager schedules that are introducing incident management software now. And, you have to wonder, if everybody's already familiar with our monitoring tooling, how easy would it be to adopt the incident management tooling that goes along with that? And then also having a first-class integration with that tooling, what types of things can we take advantage of? Could we have it launch incidents for us on an automated basis before somebody, or before an alert fires or somebody notices it? Or can it pull in people who need to be paged when a certain service alerts? Those sorts of things would be really valuable to us, and it's something that we would consider in the future. Another thing to consider is how we continue to scale this out. So standardization versus customization. So running incidents is easy, except for when there's an incident. Really all you're doing is following a checklist, but all of a sudden there's pressure and there's stress and, oh no, my CLI isn't up to date and my tool doesn't work and I need to reach this environment I can't reach, and who do we page to bring into this? All of those things become much more difficult when there's actually an incident happening. So we have the ability to customize these workflows for each individual team that is on call if we want to, but how much customization is the right amount? There are a lot of advantages to custom workflows. We can fit the team's existing workflows. Again, we don't want to fight inertia every time we make a process change. So if we can just introduce this thing without changing process for teams, that's super valuable to us. Keeping things organized, if an incident comes through a specific team workflow, then we don't need to rely on tags or custom questions to tell us which team responded to this incident. We just know it came through their workflow. And then another thing is that it's highly adaptable. We don't need consensus from the entire organization to make changes to these workflows. The team can just decide and then make changes on their own time. On the other hand, and Martin touched on this, custom workflows mean a lot of incident response workflows to keep straight. This applies for teams like SRE, of course, but also incidents don't always fall neatly into one bucket or another, and we don't always know the cause right away. So when we're following the workflow of whatever team kicked off the incident, we have no guarantees that that workflow is actually going to be correct for the people who are pulled into that incident. And that's not a trivial hurdle, because we want to remove complexity as much as possible when an incident is ongoing. Again, these checklists are not rocket science, but everything's harder when you're trying to fix something that's broken. And then another difference that's difficult to handle with custom workflows would just be differences in severity level. We're going to want to go back and analyze incidents in aggregate periodically. And if Sev1 means different things to different groups, how much can we learn from an aggregate view of Sev1s? We don't know. It might not be a very valuable exercise if it means different things to different people. And so we don't actually know the answer to this whole question yet. It's an open question, standardization versus customization. It's something that we're going to have to experiment with, and I think it'll be a real challenge of scaling the incident management process out to many teams. And one more thing to look at is just how can we use data to have more effective analysis? We want to build on this foundation that we have, and we want to get more data all the time, but then also how are we presenting it outwards? What can we do for individual teams to learn about their own incidents and services? Looking at the organization, can we learn anything about incidents and incident response by looking across the organization? How can we improve those processes? What are the commonalities and differences? And what can we learn from our most stable services that can be applied across the organization? Another thing to look at is just SLOs. How does our SLO performance relate to our incidents? Can we learn about severity levels or how our SLOs are tuned? Can we improve at creating more relevant SLOs in the future? These are all things that we're excited to explore more in the future with a richer understanding of incidents. And all of it will be built on this data foundation that we gained from adopting incident management tooling in the first place. So that's it for me. We look forward to exploring more incident data and improving on our process in the future. But in the meantime, thank you for your time and attention, and have a great day.